in listen-only mode.
Okay, good afternoon everyone. Welcome to our PlanIt Beyond the Basics webinar series. I'm Raya Smiley and I will be facilitating our webinar today. This is our first webinar in 2017, which will be focusing on value-added planning practices and how to get more out of your plan as you're going through your comprehensive planning process. If during the webinar you have any questions, please post them using the webinar control panel. We will get to your questions at the end of the webinar. Today's webinar is Regional Industrial Land Inventory, where we will be discussing manufacturing real estate needs and the benefits of preserving industrial land. So let me briefly introduce you to our presenters. Todd Graham.
Hi, welcome everyone on the call.
Is a principal forecaster for the Council's Regional Policy and Research Team, where he provides project leadership in land use economics, demography, and economic analysis. Corinne Wendell.
Hello, everyone.
Is a senior planner and sector representative for communities in parts of Anoka, Ramsey, and Washington counties. She leads the development of resources related to regional economic competitiveness and incorporating economic development into local comp plans. Todd, I will now turn the presentation to you.
Thanks, Raya. In this webinar, we are looking at industrial land from a couple of angles. On screen is an outline of what we will cover, starting with some observations on the economic importance of manufacturing and related industries that use industrial land. Then I'll introduce the regional industrial land inventory that our team here at Met Council is assembling. I will describe the data resources we've invested in it, and I'll discuss the functionality that we intend for the web-based version of the inventory. That web-based online industrial atlas will be ready this summer. After describing the information we have, we will consider how this is useful as a tool for city planning. Fourth, I will share our findings summarizing the inventory of just how much industrial land supply is there in the Minneapolis-St. Paul region. And then my colleague Corinne Wendell will present the final parts of this. She will discuss the need for an industrial strategy and industrial land preservation. Corinne will get into tools and tactics available to cities, and we will wrap up with case studies of how industrial land strategy can be implemented in a couple of different cities and regions. As a starting point to get us oriented, the total size of our Twin Cities metro economy is over $400 billion a year. That is summarizing the output of all industries, all parts of the economy. Manufacturing and wholesale trade and transportation and warehousing, these are the industries that make and move physical goods, are about 1/3 of that output. Our vision for regional economic competitiveness is an economic environment that enables these industries and keeps them competitive in the national market, and thereby keeps them here in our region. This really can't be overstated. These industries are primary wealth generators because most of what they produce are goods for export. And on screen I've broken out and split apart just the part of economic output that is exported. These are goods shipped out of the region and sold elsewhere. It's not just international exports, it's mostly exports to the rest of the United States. Exports include $83 billion in goods shipped out of the region and another $80 billion in services. So, trade is generally good. It incites competitive performance, and trade is especially good for a region like the Twin Cities. Twin Cities made machine parts or medical devices or windows are shipped out and sales revenue flows in, and as a result of that trade, the region is more prosperous. Anyway, all of this was the economics background. We're now going to move into the planning context. The competitiveness of our manufacturing sector and our export economy is a team effort. It depends on the performance of these companies, obviously, but it also depends on the region functioning to enable economic connections and a quality of location. So our desired economic competitiveness outcome is a region where the industries can find the resources and infrastructure needed to operate. As discussed in our regional plan, two dynamics or systems that local governments and the Met Council get involved in are real estate and also the transportation networks that connect industries to supply chains and to markets. With respect to the real estate, Met Council in its regional plan calls on local governments to understand the function of industrial land and its economic implications. And further, Met Council calls on local governments to plan for industrial land preservation and coexistence with surrounding land uses. While there's not today any specific policy designated priority sites or insisting that cities preserve specific priority sites, the Thrive MSP plan and also our transportation policy plan do emphasize that port locations and railroad served locations deserve some special consideration by cities. I think we're frozen up here. Here we go. What are we actually going to do at Met Council? Well, this on screen is an excerpt from Thrive MSP 2040. We're going to advance as a best practice the protection and preservation of industrial lands that are served by airports, railroads, and water ports. We're going to prepare and publish online an industrial land inventory identifying the land that is in current industrial use or is planned as future industrial. And this is in order to answer how much land supply is there and where is it. Finally, we're going to encourage the guidance of future industrial land as needed in places that have the infrastructure, the resources, and other site characteristics that are most conducive to industrial use. The big caveat here in this third point is as needed. You'll see in today's presentation coming up that Twin Cities Metro has already an abundance of land guided for industrial use. Jumping into the industrial land inventory, I want to spend a few minutes outlining the data resources that we've incorporated into this. These are data resources we identified as meaningful to either economic development or planning. We may add more data elements. Each time I present this, there are a few suggestions. The starting point, the base of the inventory, is the industrial subset of our regional parcels data, which brings together the property information from the 7 counties. This resource provides us with location, tax classifications, assessed values of real estate, and also details on who owns the property. Other data resources are overlaid and intersected or joined with the parcels, so we're identifying is the parcel in our metro urban services area. And that's a pretty good proxy for urban services more generally. We bring in the observed land use. Was this land industrial in 2010? And also planned land use, which shows where the cities or townships have guided industrial land supply for year 2030. Here's a high-level overview, the 7-county area. The dark purple that you see on screen are industrial lands that were observed in year 2010. The lighter pink color are lands that are planned and guided as industrial, but they're not yet built in 2010. And we can layer on other features as well. We can add on rail lines and freight highway corridors that were prioritized in a recent study by Met Council's transportation planners. And we can also layer on intermodal freight facilities and transfer points that are identified by MnDOT. Beyond these transportation network connections, we also can join in neighborhood or zone characteristics. For example, assessing the labor market connection, we can provide the number of employed workers living in the local area and the characteristics of that local workforce. The final item on screen here is industrial real estate records that are tracked by the Commercial Association of Realtors and its data partner Xceligent. This gets us a number of property attributes that would not be native to the parcels data that we get from the counties, and those include the building size, the clear height inside the building, also counts of loading docks and drive-in bays. All things that would be of interest to a site selector or a business looking for existing real estate. Well, let's look at some maps. This is existing land use in Plymouth, Minnesota and surrounding neighboring cities. For orientation, I will outline Plymouth here in white. There's a large industrial district right in the middle of Plymouth on the south side of Highway 55, which runs from northwest to southeast on this screen. There's also industrial districts in neighboring cities of Golden Valley and in New Hope. So just to focus our attention, this map is really busy, but to focus our attention, here I have turned off all the non-industrial land uses, and we're just looking at land that is in industrial use or planned for industrial use. We're combining here the parcels data and also land use layers and the realtors data. So if any of those data resources pointed to current or planned industrial use, it is here in our inventory. These GIS displays that I'm showing today are really preliminary mock-ups of what we expect to have for an online industrial atlas later this year. It is a work in progress. I expect we will offer background base maps where you can see a base map or aerial imagery where you now see white on the screen. And the ultimate product, it will look different. There are a few basic functionalities that will definitely be in the online industrial atlas. One is the ability to navigate around the region to different parts of the region, to zoom in or zoom out so that you can see as much area as you need to see. Another basic functionality is the ability to search and filter and select properties using criteria to drill down into the inventory. So on screen here is an example of that. On this slide, I have just subsetted just the industrial properties that are along rail lines. Another basic functionality is the ability to filter with multiple criteria. So here on this screen, I will drill down from the previous find, and now I'm showing just the properties that are identified as having current warehouse buildings. Another functionality is the ability to select an individual property and quickly pull up its attributes. So to illustrate that, here in the circle toward the top of the screen is an 18-acre parcel in northeast Plymouth. It's currently in industrial use. The commercial realtors tell us that it is 5355 Nathan Lane. The property has a warehouse building of 64,000 square feet. Ceiling height is missing from the record. That's not shown here, but it does have 5 loading docks. It's adjacent to a rail line, and it's also, we see in this display that it's less than a mile from the World Transload Logistics Freight Facility. So there are additional attributes that are not shown on screen. I'm using a static screenshot today. If you had full interactive capability, you could scroll through additional characteristics. You could see that it's in a zone where the land averages $76,000 per acre in land value. you'd see that there are 106,000 employed workers living within 5 miles of the site, and that 20% of that local workforce are in blue-collar industries. We can look up other characteristics as well, like the landowner from the county parcels data. So I said the basic functionalities will be filtering and selecting industrial site records, looking up property characteristics, and there will also be the option of summarizing the numbers. So on this display, I've selected just the industrial land in Plymouth city limits itself. I've turned off the properties in the neighboring cities, and I can get a count that there are 371 parcels totaling 1,952 acres. So this was kind of a whirlwind tour. When we have the online version of our industrial land inventory ready, we will produce a how-to tutorial. For now, I think suffice to say it's coming. One product that will be, one of our products will be this industrial atlas that'll be online. It will be findable through the Council's local planning handbook. A closely related product for GIS power users will be a downloadable geodatabase or shapefile with all the data that was behind these map displays. And both products, they have the same information. But we're allowing options so that you can work with the data either through our web map or through your own desktop GIS system, whichever is preferred. So how is this useful to planners? The industrial land inventory provides site attributes that you can use to identify where industrial retention and preservation should be a priority in your city or your county. You can use it to identify land use conflicts and other challenges. Some of those challenges might be the fragmentation of long-standing industrial districts. You can use it to assess industrial suitability. Does a site have the characteristics that make it ready for successful industrial use? Which raises another question. What land is well suited? How do we assess that? So I want to spend a couple minutes on that. To identify what matters most for new industrial development, we put together a statistical analysis looking at industrial developments over the past 5 years, and we compared what's been built versus all the other industrial sites that were not chosen. And from that statistical analysis, we found that zoning or plan guidance for industrial use is really the lowest hurdle. There's a lot of land to choose from. But the probability of something being built really depends on site and location characteristics. So our analysis gets into those factors that add to the probability of industrial development. Number one, we found that raw land sites or sites that have had the buildings removed are the major factor. Industrial guided greenfield sites or undeveloped sites have about a 1% per decade probability of development. But if it's in an urban services area that more than doubles the probability of development. If it's proximate to any freight network, highway, rail, or port facility, that more than doubles the probability as well. And size of the parcel matters also. More acres improves the odds. So a 40-acre site is going to be maybe 60% more likely to be developed than a small 1-acre site. So all these factors, they are additive in the model that we put together. These attributes do stack up. If there was a scenario where you had a site with all of these characteristics and 40 acres in size, then the probability expands from about a 1% probability per decade to a 10% probability per decade. Having these characteristics just makes the land more marketable, more viable. Now, having said that, there are some other factors that work against the development viability. We discovered these through the same analysis. The most significant are adjacent residential development and also land cost or land value. If the land is desirable for other uses, that drives up its value. And industrial site selectors will be outbid by the other uses. In fact, among the industrial developments that we analyzed, things that were built over the past 5 years, all of them we found were built on land that was valued at less than $250,000 per acre, less than $250,000 per acre. I expect many people on this call already know firsthand what it is that the industrial developers are asking for. The point here is that these market demand factors can be demonstrated with some statistical analysis. So now I've discussed how we put together our industrial inventory, what the moving parts are, and what remains is to talk about the regional total results. Current industrial land indicated by either the county parcels, tax classifications, or by the commercial realtors database, this land supply in current use totals to about 51,000 acres. Now that's slightly larger than if you obtain the data from any of the sources that I mentioned alone. But we're defining industrial use liberally here. It's land that was picked up either in the tax parcels or it was picked up by the industrial realtors. Along with the land that's in active use, county parcels shows another 19,000 acres that are vacant industrial land. So this is growing room that is really at the front of the queue. It could be available today. Finally, there's another 32,000 acres that are guided for future industrial use in cities' comprehensive plans. Bottom line, there is enough undeveloped and planned future use, future industrial land use to double our industrial activity if there was a doubling of demand. Does this supply have the location that developers and buyers want? Does it have the characteristics that we introduced earlier? We can identify criteria and drill down into this land supply. All told, there are 38,000 acres of supply that are in the MUSA. Of that amount, 34,000 acres are along a freight network, either truck freight or rail or river ports. Developers are often saying they want or need bigger parcels, so we can look at how many of these sites are 10 acres or more, and it's about 2/3 of what was mentioned above. So these are a few of the criteria that can be applied. We can keep going. We could look at, is the land affordable? Is it proximate to workforce? And so on. All these variables will be available in the land use inventory that we publish this summer. So how does the supply that was just discussed, how does it compare with the anticipated demand for industrial land? Our team at Met Council prepares an economic forecast for the region, and our findings in that work include economic and employment growth. The region's economy is growing. It will add still more jobs over the next 15 years. But most of the forecasted employment expansion is going to be located in a commercial or retail or office setting. If we are subsetting just the manufacturing and wholesale and warehousing industries, these industries are really approaching their employment peak. Between now and year 2025, they are forecasted to grow by just 6%. I picked the year 2025 because that is the peak, and thereafter these industries do not add employment. In fact, they could shed employment as new technology and mechanization could reduce labor needs. Some other trends that we look at in assessing the demand include the regional trends of industrial construction, and finally the production output forecast. Manufacturing may not add more jobs, but it will continue to have double-digit growth in output, things being produced, and the dollar value of that output. So combining all these factors together, looking at the job growth, the industrial buildings, and the output growth, we think that maybe an upper end projection has industrial land demand growing by 12% between now and 2030. The summary for this slide is expect net growth of just 3,000 to 6,000 acres brought into an active industrial use in the coming years. So returning to the industrial land supply, let's look at these things side by side. This graph shows now just the vacant and planned industrial supply. We can add in criteria. Is it in MUSA? Is it along freight networks? If so, there's 34,000 acres. If I add the condition of affordable land, now there's 32,000 acres. Or if I just consider land that's adjacent to river ports or railroad lines, that's 11,000 acres. You remember that we prioritize those land uses, that particular submarket in our Thrive MSP 2040 plan. These are still large land supplies, but on the demand side, as I said in the previous slide, we're expecting only 3,000 to 6,000 acres brought into active industrial use. So the conclusion is, in the long run, viewed from a high level, we will have enough industrial land. Having said that, there could be specialties with supply more limited, specifically industries that need to ship or receive material in bulk industries. These would be sand and aggregate or wood products or agricultural products. These industries need rail service or river barge service because of the bulk material that they need to get in or out of the Twin Cities. And they really only have a limited set of choices. And that's why, again, Thrive MSP 2040 calls out rail adjacent and port adjacent land as this regionally critical issue. That's the long run picture. In the short run, there's still some other challenges. We want businesses and their site selectors to have options, but the tens of thousands of acres that I've called long-term supply, they might not be available immediately. So site selectors and businesses that are moving or expanding this year or next year face the challenge, can I find a large enough parcel right now? Are landowners willing to sell that land? And that's a question that's not addressed in the industrial land inventory because readiness to sell is elusive information. There are industrial realtors that specialize in this. Back to the planning questions though. How to apply these conclusions in your county or your city. Now that we're into the hot part of the 10-year planning cycle, you have a deadline for updating your comprehensive plan. Now is a good time to ask, is the land supply in the right places? Do the sites have the right characteristics? And as you review your land guidance inherited from your legacy plan from 9 or 10 years ago, be aware that, again, our region has over-guided industrial land. We've got a very large supply. That is one of our conclusions. But still, consider allowing industrial if you have those sites that have rail or river, a river port adjacent. As we've said in our regional plans, the river and freight rail systems are already in place. That infrastructure cannot move to other locations. Another question, if you have a large amount of land guided for industrial, should you consider re-guiding it to other uses? And the answer here is it depends. Don't make a decision without really doing a little bit of research. It depends on, do you have industrial tenants or manufacturing activity that's already in place and you want to keep them. You want to retain those businesses. We don't want to cause headaches for existing businesses or end up displacing them. And so to introduce Corinne Wendell's half of this webinar, our challenges are these. Can we preserve those zones that have the right characteristics and the right location for industrial use? Corinne is going to discuss industrial strategy for your plan and industrial preservation in particular. Corinne, the mouse is yours.
Excellent. Thank you, Todd. So in the next part of this webinar, I'll be discussing the industrial land preservation in 3 areas, covering the benefits, the steps, and the tools, and also including 4 examples which could be applicable to all types of communities. So starting with the benefits, there are many, many benefits that can be seen from preserving industrial land. And so within the cities, they're seeing different preservation efforts and strategies that have been successful. And so as many communities know, investing and preserving industrial land and manufacturing areas is critical to the economic health, economic growth, the viability, and well-being of a city. Preserving industrial land often leads to using existing parcels for redevelopment, which is then more cost-effective overall in terms of repurposing that existing building versus demoing or changing the use or changing the building type. So next, it is seen that preservation often leads to business expansion, retention, and job growth. Communities that see this benefit are implementing retention strategies, such as a BRE program or business retention and expansion, where they're getting to know their businesses. They're getting to know the local industrial businesses. They're meeting with them, finding out what their needs are. They're focusing on how they can play a role in the workforce development within their city to retain these businesses that are successful and businesses that they would like to see continue in their community and do well. So another benefit to preserving is to ensure that land continues to be available to support the changing needs of urban manufacturing and future technology. The picture shown here is from an Amazon facility, something similar that you would see on the interior of the facility, let's say in Shakopee. This is the different type of setup that future technology and future manufacturing or facilities may look like from what we see today. Also, the last benefit to preserving is really to make sure that preserving industrial land prevents industrial businesses from being displaced when faced with unexpected land use changes, the allowance of non-industrial uses, and adjacent land use conflicts. Preservation is a tool that can stabilize an existing industrial park or an industrial corridor or even those long-term businesses that you have in your community. As you see in the map here, the site plan, you see warehousing, but to the south you have a residential zone. And so that could potentially cause conflict in that land use change or having adjacent land uses not be compatible. Next, we're going to look at the steps to ensuring preservation. And so when looking at preserving industrial land, one of the first things that can be done is to create a database that includes a detailed inventory of all the industrial zone land within your community. This could also include land that allows industrial uses as well as future guided industrial land as part of a future land use map. Lucky for us, this is something that Todd has talked about, that you can use a starting off point. So the land use inventory tool that's being available later, that will be available later this year, is something that you can start with in order to start this preservation process. So from that land use inventory database and information and your future land use map, you can then start identifying areas that should be preserved for industrial land. So whether that be for an industrial park or corridor that you already have or may want to see in the future in your community, you can also identify areas that could transition to non-industrial uses, such as a mixed-use district or strictly commercial. So you can start to get to know the areas within your community and make those decisions based on that inventory tool. And so next, what would be helpful and as a step to ensuring preservation is to really make sure that you have your zoning code updated and utilize it to help your community plan. And so it does become a tool for economic development. The zoning code should be up to date in terms of the permitted and the conditional and the interim industrial uses, as well as those the development standards that go along with those types of uses. And then it's also helpful where the city can guide certain industrial uses, and then they can also avoid those land use conflicts in that process. So in addition to the code, the zoning map should also be up to date in terms of identifying where the industrial park, corridor, or industrial zones are located, either by the underlying zoning designation, whether it's a PUD or even an overlay. So another step could be to incorporate an industrial economic development strategy into the comprehensive planning process, whether you have it already or whether you'd like to do an update in this area. You can provide specific recommendations for future industrial development or redevelopment. In addition, if you'd like to include a small area plan that could be developed in order to specifically address some goals and opportunities of certain areas that you see within your city. When you tie a small area plan to your comprehensive plan, this is a great way to make sure that those goals and objectives are realized. And then the last step is to find ways to coordinate land use planning and economic development. And so zoning tools alone cannot offer the complete solution for strengthening economic development in terms of industrial land. However, ensuring close coordination between economic development and land use planning within your community can further the policies and objectives of decision-making for retention efforts. So for example, you want to make sure that all of the advisory and decision-making bodies within your community are all speaking together. So when you're getting together with your EDA or your city staff, with the Planning Commission or City Council, you want to make sure that all of those different advisory and decision-making bodies are working towards the same vision and goal for the community. So now we're going to talk about some tools and ways to preserve. And so there's certain specific tools that are being utilized in preserving industrial land. So most commonly seen is ensuring that zoning classifications support the industrial uses. For example, within land use categories, outlining the various types of industrial uses your city has or would like to have under the land use categories, whether that be heavy industrial or general industrial or light industrial, and even the different types of mixed use districts. It would be a good tool in order to make sure that those are organized in a certain way and that they're classified and that they're listed under the certain uses that you'd like to see. So another tool is rezoning. So when you are rezoning parcels within your community, you want to ensure that the rezoning does not eliminate land that's guided for industrial. Usually it's seen that when industrial land is rezoned to non-industrial, the loss of the land from the city's inventory is generally permanent. So that land most likely does not come back after it's rezoned. And so the last tool has many parts to it, but it's focused on outlining the different land use designations that can be utilized within a city to preserve industrial land. So these various designations have been seen used from smaller communities to larger cities. So the first one is a PID, or Planned Industrial Development. This acts as an overlay to provide flexibility for development such as industrial or a mixed-use project for any site. And so the the underlying zoning district then remains for a PID. The next one is a Planned Manufacturing District, or PMD. So this is a special zoning designation that places significant restrictions on the rezoning of industrial land. The intent of this type of zoning designation is to protect industrial firms from encroachment by uses that are incompatible with manufacturing. There is a larger advantage in choosing this type of land use designation when you want to either stabilize land markets in an area or create a secure and predictable environment for investors and to prevent conversion of valuable industrial land to non-industrial uses. And so once this is in place, this type of zoning district has very little flexibility. So our third one is a mixed-use district. So most planners know this is one of the most commonly seen zoning tool that is used within cities. So this type of district can support both or all of residential or commercial and light manufacturing uses. So cities could utilize a more stringent zoning language if they would like within a mixed-use district to actually require projects to incorporate a mixture of uses, whether that's a percentage of any one of these, whether it's residential, commercial, or light manufacturing. And then an example of this type of development could be to have industrial and retail spaces on the first floor or base level, and then you could have office above, and then you could fill in the remaining height limit with residential. And so these mix of uses can change depending upon where they are within your community. The fourth one is an industrial employment district. So this type of zoning district provides a space for those industries which are critical to the economic well-being and health of a city. When there's a concentration of manufacturing or industrial activity, language is integrated into the land use regulations to focus on protection and growth of these industries. So by allowing for items such as additional density, flexibility to upgrade or expand industrial buildings, which sometimes doesn't happen within certain areas, it does allow for a reduction in those parking requirements. So this also has the availability of adding small retail that supports the business community and industrial workers, and then also allows a wider variety of commercial uses as a buffer between the core industrial areas and residential communities. And so our last one here is a creative economy district. And so this is a special mixed-use district that's a combination of industrial spaces and commercial office spaces. So this type of district increases density and allows for office additions to those existing industrial businesses. So it does require a certain percentage of floor area remain reserved for the industrial uses only. And then it increases the lot coverage requirements to take advantage of large flexible floor plates, and then does require special permits for uses that are not as desirable in this area, which would be, for example, a hotel or storage. So it really focuses on that industrial building and how that can become part of the economy for those areas. So next we're going to take a look at some of our example cities that utilize various tools and steps in order to preserve their industrial land. And so there's many cities across the U.S. that are utilizing preservation techniques in order to grow and develop and redevelop their industrial land. So today we're going to highlight a few of these examples such as Rosemount, Milwaukee, Chicago, and New York. And so the tools that they offer can be applied to both smaller communities or larger cities. So the first one we're going to take a look at is the city of Rosemount. So here in Minnesota, Rosemount actually includes an economic development chapter within their 2030 comprehensive plan. So this chapter includes information that highlights the importance of their industrial businesses for employment, provides a table listing the major industrial employers within their community. They establish a program to create a Rosemount Business Park. They do acknowledge the change in requirements for their general industrial zoning district and the integration of a light and general industrial zoning district in order to continue to support these types of land uses. So most notably seen, the city has utilized its future land use map to coordinate industrial growth and development and has outlined economic development goals and policies that specifically speak to preserving and providing additional industrial land. So for example, what you'll see here on the screen is on the map to the left shows the 2005 land use map, what was existing then in 2005. And then on the right, you see the future land use map that's included in their 2030 comprehensive plan. And so you could see the recognition of their industrial concentrations. So once in 2005, as you can see, those darker purple areas show where their industrial land was located. And then in the 2030 map, you show where light industrial and general industrial and even a business park have been added and guided in those same areas. And so what's interesting to see about the differences in these maps is that you can see that these parcels were definitely situated along freight corridors. That was very important to the city to make sure that they're oriented in a way that provides additional access. And then also you can see that the land was actually doubled in that time. So from what was existing in 2005 to what they would like to see guided in the 2030 future land use map. They started with around 1,700 acres and it has increased to around 3,400 acres. So as Todd mentioned, a lot of the land can double, so that the need for the land is available. And so Rosemount has seen that, and clearly the economic development chapter is an integral part to their planning and growing their workforce. they definitely take a high priority in preserving land related to industrial uses. So the next city that we're going to take a look at is the city of Milwaukee. And so the past few decades, the city's inventory of industrial zone land has had a loss of nearly 1,200 acres. So Milwaukee's experienced significant loss in manufacturing firms and jobs. And so in 2012, there was a study conducted, and it recommended that the city of Milwaukee take on two different planning objectives in order to preserve industrial land. So first was to complete a detailed site-specific inventory of industrial land. And so they do have 15 officially designated industrial corridors. And so they mapped those areas and showed where they would like to preserve industrial land and where land might fall off as maybe into mixed use or commercial or other types of uses. And then the second recommendation for the city was to consider adopting stronger planning tools for preserving their industrial land. And so what they did is they put in place planned manufacturing districts, which we had talked about. It's a little, those zoning districts that are more strict in nature. And so the city of Milwaukee has also undertaken an ambitious effort to transform the 30th Street corridor, which is the photo you see here. This is a concept of what it would look like. And so they really wanted to create a modern employment center and an economic hub for the near north neighborhood. And so the city worked collaboratively with its stakeholders to develop an economic development master plan, and it helped them inform and guide future economic development in the area. And so the goal of this master plan is to provide a realistic, market feasible, and implementable vision to achieve this transformation. So this includes preserving those types of industrial land. So our third example is the city of Chicago. And so Chicago has also put in place planned manufacturing districts. So this was a tool that they really thought would be helpful for the city in order to preserve their industrial land. And the PMD for the city of Chicago is a specific zoning designation that places significant restrictions on the rezoning of industrial land. And so the intent of this was to protect the industrial firms from encroachment, also by uses that are not compatible with manufacturing. And they've come up with 14 total PMDs throughout the city that you can see in the map to the left. All those darker purple areas indicate all of the 14 industrial corridors that they have. And so a key advantage of using this type of district is to stabilize those land markets and then create a secure and predictable environment for the investors. And so when the PMDs were put in place, the future zoning for those areas are no longer in question. And so those PMDs do represent a larger percentage of the land that's recognized for industrial corridors. And so the last example we have is for the city of New York. And so in 2016, New York actually celebrated their 100th anniversary of comprehensive zoning law. And so New York passed the most comprehensive update. The last update they did was in 1961 for their zoning code. And so a highlight of this update that they've done last year is to make sure that zoning for industrial preservation really was at the forefront. And so they integrated a variety of mixed-use districts. They also encouraged business zones that integrated the growing technology, along with light industrial and residential housing and retail uses. And they also incorporated open public space into those areas. So the map to the left shows you what the map looked like in 1922. The New York Public Library provided this map, and it shows all of the manufacturing industries back in 1922. And then the Zola that you see on the right, that was their branding that they did for their 100-year anniversary of updating their zoning code. So it's the zoning and land use plan for the city of New York. And so most notably for this, they did incorporate 3 new zoning districts in order to preserve industrial land. They incorporated the Industrial Employment District, the Creative Economy District, and several new mixed-use districts. And so this is really a great time for New York to kind of reflect on the different land uses that it's had in the past and know that preserving industrial land is important for the community. And so this change was definitely necessary in their zoning code update.
Well, perfect. Thank you, Todd and Corinne. Now we're going to answer, we have time to answer a few questions before we have to end this webinar. Let me just look. Our first question is, whichever one of you want to respond, what can be done to communicate with industrial business owners within my community to facilitate the preservation process of their industrial land?
Sure, I could take that one. So as discussed earlier in the preservation of industrial lands, one of the areas that really can help a community communicate with its business owners is to actually go through a BRE program. So you can look at the tools that are offered through a business retention and expansion program. This can be used as an economic development strategy as well as a mechanism to really get to know the needs of your businesses. It's important to know how they want to stay in your community, how they want to grow, how they want to expand, and then also how the city can really be a proponent of these businesses who would like to stay in the community and how they can be better supported. So I would definitely say a BRE program would help in that communication with the business owners.
Well, thank you. Actually, you mentioned BRE, and I have a question related to that. Where can I get more information on BRE, business retention, and expansion, either informational or educational?
Sure. So a great resource actually is through the University of Minnesota Extension. They do offer actually a certificate program through that extension program, and so BRE is very important to their learning and their education component, and so a lot of resources can be found through them.
Yeah, I'd say along with that, there are consultants who specialize in economic development strategy and BRNE, and those can be identified through the EDAM, the Economic Development Association of Minnesota.
Great. Is freight rail access really that important anymore?
Well, yeah, this is one of the things that I mentioned in the middle of our webinar. There are industries present in the Twin Cities that are involved in the production or the movement of large bulk shipments, and these tend to be agriculture, food manufacturing industries, wood products industries, also natural resource industries like sand and aggregate. All of these commodities are being moved in large shipments, and you just can't do that economically with just truck. For those industries, we need either river ports or we need rail.
Okay. What types of elements within the economic development chapter of our comprehensive plan update would help in the preserving of industrial land?
You want me to start and then you'll finish?
Yeah, that would be great.
Well, if your community is thinking about developing an economic development chapter for your comprehensive plan, there are a number of elements that can be included, and we have something of a list here, starting with identifying an economic development policy and goals, either through your Economic Development Authority or your City Council or both. Within the plan, you would want to do some assessment of what is the economy and employment in your jurisdiction, including describing the city's employment base and resident workforce. Also, the industrial land inventory that we've discussed in this webinar becomes an important component for knowing what goes where. If you have small area or downtown or neighborhood plans, those can be brought into consideration. You'll want to highlight any business assistance programs that you have, also any business retention and expansion program that you're involved in. And you'll want to discuss how the industrial zones or industrial parks of the city relate to the rest of what's going on and relate to the freight network. Corinne, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think I'd just like to add, in looking at the example from Rosemount, they really have a great framework for what they included in their economic development chapter, which has really proven to be successful to them in looking at the work that they've done. And so all of the elements that Todd mentioned are very instrumental in making sure that that chapter is well-rounded and that it really relates to the other areas within your comprehensive plan, whether that be land use or transportation, and so that they all speak to one another. And so I think the addition of that chapter would definitely help with the economic development efforts of any city.
Perfect. Do you have a suggestion or resources for evaluating the suitability of existing industrial areas for new industrial development? Some older areas may have small lot sizes, poor transportation access, or obsolete buildings and may need repositioning.
Why don't I start on this one? I think in the question, the person asking has identified some of the factors, and other factors were listed in the middle of our webinar, where we talked about our analysis of what factors led to the greater probability of new industrial development. It includes location, location, location. Are you along a freight corridor? Do you have large parcels or assemblable multiple parcels? Is there workforce in the immediate area? And then also the market characteristics, like the cost of real estate or land in those areas. These are all things that are going to contribute to the marketability of.
Okay. I hope that answered the question. This will be the last question that we have time for, and I apologize for that. This is about, maybe quickly you can mention this, what are some examples of the way manufacturing will look like in the future?
Sure, I can start on that one. Actually, from some of the information that is seen in today's type of manufacturing, it really depends. So like Todd mentioned, there's going to be smaller sites, larger sites. It really depends on their location, their access. Certain areas that we see, there's a different type of demand for warehousing and distribution. And so there may be larger facilities on the periphery of the Twin Cities, and there may be smaller facilities in the core. And then also we are seeing definitely faster production and delivery needs. Those have been around for quite some time, but they are changing. And so the wholesalers and online retailers, they definitely have a different range of facility needs in today's market than we've seen before. And so some of the areas could be smaller, that are focused on more flexible spaces, and they actually are helpful to enable that faster delivery. But I think looking at this land inventory tool will be really instrumental in figuring out when businesses come to your community, or whether the businesses want to expand already within your community, what land is really going to be useful for them, and in coordination with that development or redevelopment. So it's really going to depend on the nature of the work being done.
Well, thank you both, Corinne and Todd. If you guys have additional questions, please feel free to email Todd or Corinne directly.
Absolutely.
They'll be happy to answer any of your questions. And then before we leave, I just have a couple of things to add.
Upcoming events.
Yeah, our next webinar in the PlanIt Beyond the Basics webinar series is about school districts on March 9th. Tara Beard will be discussing school districts and planning considerations for comprehensive plans as it relates to the relationship between the cities and the school districts. Registration for this webinar and also other events is now open and available on our PlanIt page of the handbook. We will be posting this webinar videos online, as well as a Q&A document within the next week. We will also have an annotated PDF of the PowerPoint slides. And finally, as you are exiting the webinar, there will be a very short and quick 5-question survey that we really do appreciate if you fill them out. And again, please feel free to contact us if you have any questions or comments. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks.
Thank you.